Okay, Dylan, welcome.
Thank you very much.
So your work is in some capacity, on machine learning and neuroscience.
Yes.
Why does neuroscience, which I wouldn't immediately think of anything related to computer science, lend itself so well to machine learning?
Well, machine learning, in its essence, is understanding patterns which aren't immediately obvious to people.
Yep.
And when you're working with any form of biological neural network, the inherent complexity of that kind of demands approaches which would go beyond that of human comprehension.
Mm-hmm.
So machine learning is the perfect tool to kind of uncover these hidden relationships between variables in systems like that.
Okay. So, given that most people will have only really heard of machine learning AI recently, for obvious reasons, because of developments in the last few years, at what point did you realize that this is something that's quite revolutionary?
In general, with respect to machine learning, or more kind of aimed towards transformer LLMs?
With machine learning and then also specifically to neuroscience.
I was quite young, to be honest. I came into this field because I wanted to get into brain-computer interfacing. So
Right.
I remember being a teenager in 2016 and hearing about Neuralink and kind of understanding what BCIs really could be. And after researching kind of how you do neuron decoding, it became very apparent to me that machine learning in its original form was very integral to these kind of research avenues. And by its original form, I mean stuff like generalized linear models or like PCA, the kind of the basic stuff. So I would say quite young is when I realized that it was kind of important to the specific area of neuroscience that I'm getting into. So going on from there, I attended like autumn schools at the university, at Ulster University, to try and learn more about machine learning. And then in my master's as well, I was fortunate enough to do my master's with Professor Rasmus Peterson, and his lab entirely focuses on understanding what is encoded in barrel cortex of mice using methods like extreme gradient boosting and so on. So that's kind of how I realized machine learning was important to neuroscience.
Yeah, so given that, let's say someone's starting their PhD 5 years ago, someone's starting it now, how different is the things that they would learn then versus now?
If you're talking about PhDs in general, that's too broad of a question to give you a
No, I suppose in the
answer to.
field of neuroscience.
But in neuroscience in particular, again, it's still dependent on what you do, because I would say most of my peers don't even touch coding, never mind kind of high-dimensional data analysis, because there's loads of wet lab stuff you can do, loads of cell culture stuff you can do. But with respect to EFIS in particular, I would say it's night and day difference personally, because you no longer have if you want to apply and use difficult computational tools, you no longer have to be a computer scientist, which is the main kind of benefit, I would say. So, for example, my work last year, I developed an approach to tracking whisker angle and whisker kinematics in freely moving mice, all of those using machine learning techniques. If I were given that task 5 years ago, to say I was 5 years older and I was given that task at the same age, the same intellect, back then, I would not have been able to do the work that I did in the time that I had to do it. No chance, because I would have had to have had a high fidelity understanding of the tools that I was using, whereas I could instead go, I want this outcome to an LLM, help me plan it and execute it, and then at the end of it, you have your pipeline working, and you don't have to be a software engineer anymore, which is the great thing.
Right. So machine learning, AI, for a lot of people, they are buzzwords. Could you essentially, in human interpretable words, explain what is your understanding of machine learning in some form of an analogy or otherwise?
In general, well, as I said, machine learning is the idea of uncovering patterns that are invisible to people based on their complexity. That is it in its essence, I suppose. It's just finding patterns. So even when you bring it from kind of your simple like regression models up to your transformer architectures, it's still just uncovering hidden patterns in the data. Whether your output is, I don't know, some like regression factor or it's your next token prediction, they're both fundamentally the same. It's just a geometric exploration of data. I suppose I didn't really touch on that. Yeah, I would say yes, it's uncovering hidden patterns in the data, but it's all derived from a geometric understanding of data as well.
Right. And as far as I understand it, a lot of maybe, especially the type of neuroscience that you're involved in, is quite data heavy.
Yes.
So is that partly why machine learning techniques apply so well here?
Yeah, 100%. Like I said earlier, the volumes of data that you're working with when you're working with spike trains or like a Neuropixel with 1,000 recording sites, you can't comprehend that much data in one go. Even sections of it, you can't fully comprehend and understand how they interact. So that's, again, why machine learning lends so heavily to this particular branch of neuroscience.
Yeah, so given that, you and your PhD and also the academics that you work with in your specific field of neuroscience, has the use of AI and machine learning allowed you to focus on more cool stuff instead of sort of just grunting through data?
So to be honest, my PhD as it stands at the moment isn't particularly machine learning heavy on my particular project. So I'm looking at Infra-Slow oscillations. So that's electrical potential fluctuations sub 0.1 hertz. And I'm just kind of knuckling down on surgical procedures and kind of base experimental pipelines. So right now, for my core project, there's not a lot of machine learning, but I do have some side projects where machine learning lets me do some pretty cool stuff. So my girlfriend is also a researcher here, working on a large preclinical Alzheimer's trial for a drug called methazolamide. And she was doing a behavioral paradigm called novel object recognition, which is where you have two objects in a box. You put a mouse in the box and you look at how long it spends exploring a novel object versus a familiar object. If you have a wild-type normal mouse with no cognitive impairment, statistically over a group of them, you'll find that they will tend to explore the novel object more than the familiar object. But then if you introduce a cognitive impairment with an Alzheimer's model or so on, you'll find that discrepancy kind of is lost and you approach more of a 50-50 split between novel and familiar. She was manually labeling hours and hours and hours of data. I looked at the problem and just applied a convolutional neural network, fine-tuned to this specific problem, changed the output header to just a three-way classification, and then you've got automated behavioral analysis pipelines. So stuff like that I really enjoy and find fun with AI, but my core project as it stands right now isn't particularly machine learning heavy.
So I understand it's something like there are certain procedures or experiments where maybe initially, or even still are, there's a lot of manual assigning of data
Yes.
to certain points. So things like assigning maybe spike potentials to specific neurons, for example.
Yes.
Now, I can, on the surface, understand why something like that would be very useful to, or at least lends itself very well to machine learning, because it seems that there isn't as standard some kind of automated algorithm that can be useful. So given that there isn't sort of an algorithm initially, how are you training a model in order so that it knows how to do that?
With respect to the novel object recognition task?
Yeah, or just any task like this.
How are you training it? Well, you still, as with all machine learning, all supervised machine learning, you're just basing it off human labels. So it'd be a case of if you have enough labeled data, you can just throw it at an algorithm and hope that it generalizes to your particular problem. There's nothing that magical to it. Yeah,
and how reliable or accurate is that process? Have there been certain times where you've tried that and gone, yeah, this isn't working as well as I hope?
How reliable is that process? Well, the reliability is entirely dependent on the quality of the human data labels. So I wouldn't really critique the process in any way. You can only really critique the labels because garbage in, garbage out. I'm yet to have a problem that I've personally worked on where the labels have been garbage to the point where my model was unusable. Yeah, so it seems like it is for some people at least. It's freeing up a lot of that time. 100%. Where you're sort of manually. Yeah. Do you think that manual sort of labeling and that manual effort has any utility to it? Yeah, of course it does. It fundamentally does in helping you learn and understand the data that you're working with. So I don't know, if we take spike sorting, for example.
Yeah. Could you explain what that is?
So spike sorting is where if I have some probe, and I don't know, let's say if I have two channels in close proximity to each other and implant that, I can look at spike waveforms from neurons firing from each of these. I don't really care about what the individual channel sees. I want to kind of amalgamate all that information such that I can find individual neurons rather than consider individual channels. So that's what spike sorting is. It's quite complicated. But when you're spike sorting, you also can get artifacts and so on. So a large part of spike sorting is that manual curation where you're going through the outputs of your particular pipeline and looking at the features and then deciding, is this actually a neuron or not? If you develop a machine learning platform to do that automatically, you'll never know what you are and aren't looking for in a neuron. So the manual curation is a very important part of learning. But once you fundamentally understand what you're working with and you just want it to get done quickly, that's when you would want to hand it over to AI. But I would say that everyone that's kind of learning or trying to get into this space, you need to learn it before you can hand it off to a computer.
Right. So speaking of sort of the learning element of everything, your degree was initially in neuroscience, correct?
Yes.
And so from sort of my general field, when I understand things about machine learning and such, I know vaguely the training involved. I know that there's, typically in a physics, a maths, or a computer science degree, you're going to take a linear algebra module, usually some form of multivariate calculus, programming, machine learning. I'm interested in what your training was like. Did you take any sort of linear algebra or calculus modules in your degree?
No, and I think it's a big failure isn't quite the right word, but I think, what word am I looking for? I think those aspects of neuroscience are underappreciated in the current Manchester neuroscience undergraduate degree.
Okay.
So my undergraduate degree was essentially entirely molecular biology and systems neuroscience.
Right.
There was very little math involved. I mean, you have the problem paper and you have some first year modules, which are very simple, but there's no hard linear algebra or kind of the bread and butter of mathematical tools of AI are not taught in undergraduate neuroscience. It's very much wet science.
Is that just at Manchester, or is that kind of...
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
I can't speak to the university's degree programs, but certainly here. I only really started getting exposed... So, for example, the first time I was exposed to linear algebra was about 18 months ago, properly exposed to it.
And that was when was the last time you'd done sort of serious mathematics?
A-level.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a big jump. There's a big jump.
It's a big jump for normal undergraduates.
It's hard to
linear
catch
algebra
up.
is usually your first degree level maths.
Exactly. So
talk about that.
It's just not. So I came into having to really understand linear algebra because I was trying to build a system which could real time do 3D reconstruction from multiple 2D cameras.
Okay.
So I was using something called Deep Lab Cut, which is like a residual neural network architecture that can track key points on a mouse's body over time. And we had multiple of these cameras set up looking at a mouse, and I now have references of where the mouse's nose, for example, is from four different cameras, and I want to kind of reconstruct where that is in 3D in real time. I had to study direct linear transformations and singular value decomposition to solve these matrices to understand where it is in 3D space. But because I'd never studied linear algebra before, I, for like 3 weeks, was just watching 3 blue, 1 brown videos and like just doing linear algebra kind of workshops and books and so on and problems so that I could then actually tackle that 3D tracking problem. But I really, at that time, that was not a fun time. I was wishing that I had done more undergraduate mathematics. But you also find in this space, the majority of really excellent people that I've come across in neuroscience didn't do neuroscience undergraduate.
Yeah.
They all come from physics or electronic engineering. So it's quite rare to see someone with a neuroscience undergraduate going into these kind of more mathsy neuroscience postgraduate problems.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that was something I was going to bring up. I spoke to Professor Laura Parks recently, and she did physics originally, a master's in physics. Mm-hmm. My guest tomorrow is Dr. Carnell. She did a mathematics undergraduate, because I think with a maths or a physics or an engineering degree, going through linear algebra, going through calculus and proof writing, that is cognitively very heavy. And it seems as though people that are, if you train yourself in those methods for 3 or 4 years, it is common to see people go from that to then neuroscience or other fields, but the reverse isn't always true. And I wonder if that's something that should change, because I'm not convinced that, it's because neuroscience is such a huge interdisciplinary field, it's not immediately obvious what departments of universities should be teaching. And I wonder what you would, if you were to advise young neuroscientists, if they should maybe take ventures in those mathematical topics.
The issue is the word neuroscience, to be honest, because it spans such a big domain.
Of course.
So you don't have to do any properly difficult maths to be a successful neuroscientist. You don't.
Yeah.
Because you could go into neuroinflammation and you want to understand the molecular biology of inflammation pathways, doing genetic manipulations and doing really cool assays, and then just doing some simple stats to quantify it at the end. You can still be a super, super successful neuroscientist. The other side of that coin is computational neuroscience, which is a whole different ballpark. So when you have someone that's young and goes, I want to do neuroscience, they don't necessarily know the distinction, the level of distinction between these two paths and what prerequisites are required for you to be good at either of them. So I think that you need to know which branch you're getting into early and then focus on those. I personally would have preferred to have done a physics or math undergraduate for my current position, because I think it's a lot easier to learn the biology in a short amount of time than it is to learn the math and the math skills in a short amount of time. So I would say if you want to be a computational neuroscientist, take physics or math. If you want to be a wet biologist or kind of more like gene oriented, then neuroscience undergraduate is fine.
Yeah, well, I suppose there's that. Even the people that are doing maths or physics or engineering, they go and start a degree in, a PhD in something like computational neuroscience or neuroimaging or something. Yes, they've got the linear algebra and the calculus under their belt, but they've probably not put something under a microscope since they were 16. My undergraduate, I'm probably never going to put something under a microscope. Probably never going to look at a cell. I'm probably never even going to have to learn what a cell's probably made of. And so when you get to your PhD, you are behind in the biochemical side of things. Now, would you say that that's a easier learning curve than learning maths and programming?
Yeah, I don't think it's easy, but easier relatively. Yeah, for sure. Because it's essentially memorizing stories at that point. You're not
okay.
You do have to have critical evaluation, because you need to be able to understand the pathways that you're working with high enough fidelity to know if I change this section, and then rationally conclude kind of the knock-on effects of that.
Yeah.
But it's just not on the same level as trying to understand hard math realistically. So no, I'd say the learning curve is definitely easier for one way than the other.
Yeah. Well, that is part of the problem, because neuroscience is such a gigantic field. I've met neuroscientists that do vastly different work that have nothing to do. I mean, there's the neuroscientists that are looking at the really minuscule chemical behavior of neurotransmitters, and then there's ones that look at very wide-scale human behavior. And so, like you said, it's important to try and know what you're getting into early. Do you have advice for undergraduates and how they can maybe narrow down, find their interests, practical tips?
Honestly, no. Not really, because I suppose it's just the cliche advice: do what excites you, do what you genuinely find interesting, and not something that you find a chore. I wouldn't say that's really like the best advice ever, because it's so individualistic. I wouldn't say there's a particular thing that you should do to find your passion, other than just what do you find interesting.
Yeah, I did want to sort of carry on about. I suppose let's keep focusing on linear algebra.
Okay.
Because it is, like I said, it's usually people's first taste of real degree level mathematics. And even in foundation studies, it can really, I mean, some people really struggle
Sure.
because they're used to the school maths where you don't really, it's not really mathematics. It's sort of learning calculations and the occasional formula.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get to linear algebra and you've got to learn sets and proof writing, and there's a lot. And, you know, like they'll have a thick textbook, like the one from Strang or something.
Yeah.
And associated with that is a lot of imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people give up.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if at any point, given that you hadn't done maths since A level
Mm-hmm.
and you were taking this, I mean, you were going right into the deep end.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a mental struggle with all of that?
Oh, for sure. Like it's mentally taxing, but I have a quote that I coined myself, at least I think I did, which is never to confuse unfamiliarity with difficulty.
Right.
And I think it's a really, really, really important skill to have in any kind of academic discipline, because you walk into anything new that's intellectually challenging and you go, this is well hard.
Yeah.
When it's not necessarily really difficult, it's just unfamiliar. And once the feeling of unfamiliarity goes away, it becomes easy to you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, think about, I mean, I'm sure you had the same experience. We think about our first time in sort of lower sixth form, learning calculus for the first time and going, what are all these symbols? This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then you carry on and you look back and you start doing partial derivatives and cool maths, and you think, oh, there was once a time where you open a calculus textbook and you just, it's a foreign language.
Exactly.
I think some people don't realize that struggle is part of the process.
Yeah.
Because I think they see either their peers or the way that a lot of mathematics is presented online as just some people just get it and some people don't. They seem a lot more confident.
Yeah.
And I wonder, was there like a specific point at which for you mathematics became demystified?
Demystified? No, I still look at some equations in analytic pipelines and just think, what on earth is happening? I'm not the best at reading equations and immediately understanding what's happening. A lot of the time I will have to go, Claude, please explain what on earth is happening here. I wouldn't even say that math has been demystified for me now at the level that I work with it, nor do I think it ever will, because it's not my bread and butter. It's not what I'm the best at. So no, I wouldn't say that math at any point was fully demystified for me, but like you said, it's very much, it's a foundational subject in that you need to learn the previous step to understand the next step. So you have to fully dedicate time to studying math, or you'll never fully understand it in any way.
Oh, yeah, of course. And I guess the other side of the coin is programming. I mean, we probably can't have this conversation without talking about programming. Were you trained in any way in programming in your undergraduate?
So not in my undergraduate, but there was a module, what was it? Computational biology. I don't know. There's a master's module that I did for computational biology, which was just basically Python programming. And I also did a data science module, which was programming in R. But both of those were master's modules. So in undergraduate, there was zero coding experience. But I took optional modules for my master's, which introduced me to coding. But by that point, it's already too late. You don't want to start learning to program in your master's. You want to be pretty competent at coding by the time you hit your research. Yeah.
Well, I mean, people, I think, obviously, since AI took off, the view on programming is completely changed, I think. I mean, people have a lot of different opinions on this.
Okay.
And it's probably interesting to see how different fields talk about it. I mean, in 2026, I'm not quite sure if the way to learn programming ideally has changed to what it was before AI came about. So, in your experience, I wonder how you would advise someone to learn programming.
Well, I'm trying to get my girlfriend to learn how to program at the moment because she's starting her PhD in September, and she wants to move away from kind of like recording just data in Excel and doing like Excel formulas, which is what a lot of biologists do, and move more into Python or R. Yeah. I would say you just have to learn the syntax of the particular language you're going to use first, of course. and don't use AI in the initial instances when you're working on really simple problems like how to build a calculator. But once you're comfortable with Python syntax, I personally see no problem with using AI to do programming for you. What I do object to, not on like a moral level, but more from a scientific safety perspective, is asking Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini to one-shot your problem. Okay. I think that lends itself, if you have a really, really complicated pipeline and you go, LLM, do this, and just blindly trust the output, you're going to get burnt at some point. So my kind of approach to it, which I think is no bias, the best approach, if I have some problem, I will write down the pseudocode for the functions that I want my project to be made from. And then I will ask a large language model to build each of the functions individually. And then once I have my functions coded, I will then stitch them together myself so that I'm confident in the flow of data through the program. And I'm confident that what's coming out is hopefully true.
Well, you mentioned Python. Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, that was the first programming language that I learned. That was in year 7. Mm-hmm. And it does seem that I think whenever I go anywhere, particularly in machine learning and AI, people pretty much only recommend and talk about Python.
Yeah.
Was that the first language that you learned?
Yeah.
Python?
Yeah, I did GCSE computer science, so I was introduced to Python fairly early. Super simple Python, obviously, but I personally don't use any other programming languages.
Right. What is it about Python that is so incredible?
I think the syntax is really nice. It's just easy to understand what's happening. And then furthermore, just the open source code bases that are available. Entire machine learning architecture code bases built on Python, whether it's TensorFlow or PyTorch. Yeah. Those kind of tools aren't as readily available or accessible or easy to use in other languages. I'm not a computer scientist. I can't speak to Python's particular quirks that make it better or worse at particular tasks. I'm sure there are arguments about that, but my viewpoint is that it's just what's there. So when you go to learn it, that's what you learn it in, and then that kind of reinforces the loop for everybody in the community that uses it.
Yeah, I mean, I want to go back to the kind of learning, initial programming, because obviously it does seem that there's a lot of AI programs that are quite good at writing code. Mm-hmm. Now, as someone that's spent a long time learning programming, when I see sort of completely new programmers, mm-hmm. I flirt with the idea of using AI to either learn programming or write their code, I do get some kind of alarm bell, because like with mathematics and like with physics, it's not really about the sort of the answers in themselves at the start. It's more learning how to learn that stuff.
Yeah.
And so, making a calculator, there's probably millions of those on GitHub.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, why learn it if I can get a Claude to do it? Well, it's because once you get to something that's not made before, you've got a pretty good backlog of understanding of how to decompose a problem and put it together and test a solution. Rather, it feels like that's the more important thing than just the arbitrary syntax of programming.
Sure.
It's not that difficult to learn the syntax of Python. You could probably do that in a day's work, but that's a separate skill of writing good code.
Yeah.
That's the difference between, just looking at a proof in mathematics and actually learning how to write a novel proof.
Yeah.
So I wonder what you think the disadvantage of using AI to either for novice programmers, but also the other side of the coin, which is that it is good at debugging and it can save time. And obviously not all struggle is necessary or useful. Mm-hmm. So at what point do you start integrating those models into your work? Like, when do you earn the right to start using it? Because I struggle with this question, and I can't think of a good answer.
It's a really difficult question, because you're asking for an arbitrary boundary, essentially, between when you should and shouldn't use AI. And it's so individualistic and subjective that there is no right or wrong answer. It's the same thing with like giving AI to kids to do their homework. Some people can't be bothered, so they'll just use it, get it done out the way, and not learn anything in the process. Other people will actually do what's intended of the learning objectives, which is to learn. I don't think there's a baseline, like a ground truth right and wrong, a ground truth boundary of when you should and shouldn't use it, and it's so subjective and problem dependent that it's not really worth thinking about, because there's just no clear answer to a question like that realistically.
Yeah. So yeah, well, I suppose one of the distinctions is when you're learning versus when you're actually creating something.
Yeah, true.
When you're learning data structures or any concept in programming, it's probably best to just do that the old-fashioned way. Pick up a textbook or look at documentation or something.
Yeah.
Versus when you're in an environment, in industry or research, then it seems like it's probably a bit more justified to start deploying some of these models, because, especially for those small tasks, it doesn't really benefit your learning to sift through loads of code to find an indentation that causes you some kind of logic error.
Of course, but then where does your opinion lie on someone that's using AI to learn to code? Not using AI to code for them, but giving AI a block of code and saying, explain this to me function by function, and using it that way, versus what you called the old-fashioned method.
Well, that's the thing. I think there's certainly... Well, I think if you're giving AI this kind of one-shot thing that you were talking about earlier, then the utility of learning it does go down. But I wonder if you're giving, let's say you're trying to learn what a certain line in a pathfinding algorithm does. It's not really much different to ask, ChatGPT versus going on Stack Overflow. I mean, going on Stack Overflow, you might feel like it's more legit, but it's not much different.
No.
In fact, AI is probably pulling from Stack Overflow.
Yeah, exactly.
So in that case, it's not much different to a teacher. And I think in situations like that, it's justified. And I think there's a degree of common sense involved. Maybe using AI as a last resort.
Yeah.
I think if you can get to the point where it's something that you're not heavily relying on.
Yeah.
Maybe a question to ask yourself is, if all the models disappear tomorrow, could I still write this? I think that's probably where I would draw some kind of line. But I also think, like looking at the sort of thing with kids with homework, it's probably not difficult to conceive that there's probably some way to make an AI that could be helpful to kids with homework by not giving them the answer or guiding them along. And I wonder if it's possible to create an AI that's specifically designed for learning, that pulls from all the learning literature and then teaches you to code in the most optimal way.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. That so do. It probably already exists realistically.
Yeah, it might do.
It's just a system prompt at that point. You don't need a new architecture. Just take ChatGPT with a decent system prompt.
But I mean,
teacher.
I do wonder if fixating on the particular learning element might be counterproductive. I think overthinking the learning process instead of actually just go and do something.
Yeah,
as opposed to, because I think a lot of these things make a lot more sense when you start practicing. It's very difficult to explain to a new programmer what to do or not do. It's like just to go write the code, and make the errors and struggle through it. Though I think some of it might be the sort of 80-20 thing. If you can get through the most of the basics on your own, and then just letting the AI do the sort of 20%, grunt, boring work.
Yeah.
I feel like that's, I feel like that's sort of my sort of take on it.
Yeah.
Personally, yeah.
That's fair.
Because I remember with my A-level project, I think I spent like 3 days looking through 5 Python files to find out why a pathfinding algorithm wasn't working. And it was because there was something in a priority queue that was not indented. And it does seem like most programmers spend most of their time debugging. And I actually wonder if you want to be more optimistic, then it does seem like using AI will let programmers actually write code and not just debug for hours on end.
Yeah, that's the thing that I get most excited about. I think it takes away the kind of finicky aspect of coding and syntax errors, and allows someone to really focus on the intellectual concept behind your code that you're trying to achieve, more so than can I write this in good practice with perfect syntax. You can really focus and knuckle down on what your particular question or target is and reach that without having to worry about the painstaking debugging process.
Yeah. What was your training like in programming from the start to where you are now? How did you learn?
I did GCSE computer science, which was useless. Completely useless. Yeah. And I could write print hello world, and that was probably about it. I understood data structures. That was about it. And then I only really started learning to code when I wanted to learn machine learning.
Okay.
So that was many a YouTube tutorial, many just watching someone write code and copying it mindlessly and then just thinking about it. But my first real kind of taste of novel coding experiences was at the Ulster University Autumn School, which was a week-long neurotechnology kind of school, I suppose. It was aimed for PhD students, but I was an undergraduate at the time. Somehow got myself onto that course. And it was a intense, like 9 a.m. to 6:30 p.m., 7 days straight of coding and machine learning practice. I remember the second lecture was an introduction to mathematics and neuroscience. I've never felt so lost in a lecture in my entire life. But that week really just kind of, I felt like I was so far behind because everyone else in that room was PhD students that do computational neuroscience. They're like, oh yeah, nodding along. That really kind of kicked me into gear to go like, I need to learn this stuff now.
Yeah.
And so that week in and of itself taught me a lot, but then also motivated me to just learn as much as I could at that time. So that was really my first kind of introduction properly into coding. And by the end of that week, I'd built a XGBoost model to predict internal speech from EEG.
Wow. And did you use any AI to assist you in that, or was that all?
100%. So this was 2022.
Right.
So this was like ChatGPT 3.5. So it wasn't like an insanely good model.
No.
But it assisted me in understanding the data structures I was working with, how to process them, and how to kind of take a file from just EEG data to actually a readable machine learning output.
Yeah. What do you think the utility in just learning programming for experimentation for fun, so without time constraint, without kind of some academic pressure is? And I someone could be doing something for fun and say, I'm just going to try and figure out stuff by myself, not use any AI. Do you think there's still utility in that?
Is there the utility in it? You probably learn more in that approach. As in, if you take two people and they have the same knowledge base and you say you need to be able to figure out how to code this particular problem, you can use AI, you can't. I would say that the person that doesn't use AI will come out more cognitively familiar with whatever project that they are approaching, but it will probably also take them 10 to 15 times as long. So the density is kind of the same with either approach, in that the person that's using AI can expose themselves to 15x more topics in that time frame. They might not understand each one at such a high fidelity, but if you can cover so much stuff in that same amount of time, there's kind of a trade-off to both, I would say.
I mean, yeah, like I said, it's I don't think there's a hard line. And I think probably it's too early to tell.
Yes, for sure.
I think the long-term learning literature is going to be interesting.
Yeah.
On AI, but I think the advice of just go do something above anything else is more useful than I think fixating on the particular cognitive elements. So I want to move on to some stuff on brain technology.
Sure.
It's partly what you're researching. So you're currently working on sort of graphene-based technology.
Yeah.
We spoke about Neuropixels.
Yeah.
And a few other pieces of technology. I also want to know, in the last maybe 5-10 years, how has the progress been on specific brain reading technology, brain-computer interfaces?
Well, it depends if you want to distinguish between people and animals. Most of the human technology that's academically readable, because a lot of it's behind closed doors at Neuralink or Synchron. It's not. The main barrier with human BCIs is biocompatibility. You still get glial encapsulation and glial scarring of foreign bodies in the brain, no matter what you do with current methods.
Okay, so what's it? Could you explain biocompatibility?
Yeah, so if I put a probe in your brain,
Yeah.
your brain's internal immune system and glial cells will recognize it as a foreign object and will essentially coat it. So if I'm putting a probe in your brain, I have to anchor it to your skull so that it stays in the same place. But your brain doesn't stay in the same place. Your brain moves around inside your skull.
Yes.
So if you have a big rigid metal electrode inside your brain, vascular pulsing, breathing, moving, all cause your brain to move this tiny, tiny bit. But the probe is still relative to the brain. So you end up with friction, which then will then release inflammatory molecules, which will recruit the immune system to that site of the probe. And then it's not entirely confirmed, but I think it's something called frustrated phagocytosis. So the microglia, which are kind of like the immune soldiers in the brain, which will clear up debris, attack pathogens, they will recognize this foreign body and they will try and phagocytose it. They'll try and engulf it. But obviously the probe is orders of magnitude larger than it. So it can't engulf it, and instead it will kind of spread along the surface of the probe. And when you have lots and lots of microglia doing this at the same time, you end up with a layer of microglia. But the cell membrane is a phospholipid bilayer, which is essentially what's the word? Why can't I remember this word? Opposite of a conductor, insulator. Wow, that took me a while. It essentially acts as an insulator. So you get signal attenuation with time. And no one has found a way to completely overcome this problem in brain-computer interfaces. Yeah. When you look at animal studies, it doesn't matter because the longest you'll record from an animal is like 12 weeks. Mm-hmm. And at that point, the signal attenuation isn't detrimental. But if you're looking at human implants for months and years, you don't want to be replacing it all the time. It's still a problem that needs to be overcome. So I'm doing some research into that at the moment as part of my PhD. So I'm looking at incorporating dexamethasone, which is an anti-inflammatory drug, into the implantation process, and also trying to use functional ultrasound to map vasculature, so you can dodge vasculature during implantation and also quell the immune system response to that initial implantation, which should hopefully improve the biocompatibility over time, but that remains to be seen with the experiments I plan to do in the future.
Yeah, well, I guess staying on topic with Neuropixels and likewise technology, it does seem like there's a lot of progress made in terms of the capability of the devices themselves.
Sure.
So the Neuropixel, this probe, currently on, I think, the second generation of Neuropixels.
Yeah.
So you can put them in animal or human brains, and it can pick up sort of data from, thousands of neurons, it seemed, in specific areas. It's a lot smaller than the first generation of Neuropixels. Mm-hmm. And there's sort of a lot of similar tech out there. So I wonder, is the kind of opticals with this kind of technology, is it a data problem, an algorithmic one? Is it infection, or is it a safety or an ethical problem? Where are the biggest obstacles?
With respect to what? Obstacles to what? We're
trying to, let's say, with a lot of these technologies, I suppose, read from the brain and then try and understand it.
Well, there's no barriers in that. You can get such high fidelity recordings. It's no problem. The technology already exists to read from the brain with high enough fidelity to do stuff with it, for sure. The problem is biocompatibility with respect to human implantations. Neuropixels are like the perfect device to do EPHIS in animals. There's not much more you can really do. You can get single unit activity. You've got multi-shank arrays, so you can record from distal regions simultaneously. The technology is already there to collect the data. It is really this case of biocompatibility and long-term implants that is the main barrier.
Is there any way to maybe suppress the brain's immune system temporarily? I know that sounds like a terrible idea, but...
That is exactly what my approach is going to be. So the probes that I work with are called GFETs, or graphene field effect transistors, and they are not electrodes, they are transistors.
Could you explain the difference?
Yeah, so a passive metal electrode is essentially listening to the changes in electrical potential by directly measuring the voltage. A graphene field effect transistor it's essentially a little tiny circuit that's passing some constant current through it, and the external brain electrical potential will modulate that current and then you can infer the voltage changes from the current modulation. There's loads of reasons why this is better, mainly for capturing really, really slow signals, because AC-coupled electrophysiology, or your standard passive electrode electrophysiology, will filter out slow signals inherently, because you have capacitors before the amplifier, which kind of act as a differentiator and filter out these really slow signals. But with the transistor approach, you can get DC-coupled electrophysiology, which is kind of just like a pure representation of what's actually happening. So we can look at these really slow shifts. But that is not relevant to the point of biocompatibility, just kind of telling you about the probes I use. Because they're not metal, they're made from polyimide. It's a really flexible substrate. So that means that now if I implant this into your brain and fix it to your skull, as the brain moves, the probe will move with the brain, not against it. So that eliminates the friction and inflammatory response to movement in general. My opinion is that if you could get a probe into the brain, like a flexible probe into the brain, without causing an immune response in the initial instance, I don't think the immune system will see the probe ever. Because there's no inflammatory reason for the probes to approach it. They don't have any kind of cell surface receptors that would trigger an immune response. The external environment wouldn't be damaged, which wouldn't trigger an immune response, and you should, in theory, have a chronically implantable probe that doesn't generate significant responses. So then that means that the main obstacle in your way is reducing disruption to the blood-brain barrier and neuroinflammatory responses to the implantation process. So that's why. So the number one factor in immune responses to electrode implantation is blood-brain barrier penetration, which is an inevitable consequence of sticking a probe in a brain. But if you can minimize that by mapping vasculature prior to implantation and planning accordingly, which of course is never always doable depending on where you're trying to implant. But those kind of approaches, I think, is where we're going to see the biggest gains in biocompatibility. But yeah, ask me in 4 years and I'll have a better answer for you.
Yeah. So there's obviously the sort of surgical element as well that is tricky. I mean, you know, stabbing something into the brain. I mean, there's certainly the hazard in that. How are you weighing up the kind of benefits and trade-offs? You know, or is that really the job of the surgeons?
Well, we do. Well, it depends. Do you mean for humans or for animals?
Oh, for humans particularly.
Well, as a doctor, your duty is to maximize patient care.
Yeah.
So you want to have a minimally invasive surgical procedure. So I don't think there's any trade-off. I think you map the brain, see what's functionally available with respect to vasculature distribution and implant there. I wouldn't say there's trade-offs per se.
Yeah. So with the kind of technology that you're using to understand the brain, what's the kind of long-term ambition with the findings that you're trying to achieve?
So Infra-Slow oscillations is really interesting and massively, massively understudied. So they were first identified in 1957 in awake rabbit visual cortex, and then forgotten about promptly for about 40 years.
Okay.
And then there was studies in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, which kind of reinstated a interest in Infra-Slow domain. They were essentially looking at how resting state networks in the brain are modulated, and found that they're modulated at a 0.02 hertz periodicity or frequency. So then people start getting interested in Infra-Slow again. The main kind of hypothesis is that it's generated by glial cells in your thalamus, but how that manifests functionally is not known because the technology's not been there to study it until graphene field effect transistors. I'm just in a lucky position because no one as of yet has had access to this technology because we're beta testers from a lab in Barcelona that make these things. No one's had the technology to be able to test these hypotheses. So in terms of the long-term goal for my PhD work, it's just understanding the functional consequences of Infra-Slow oscillations, how they manifest in different brain areas, and what their functional reason for being there is. So I can't really give you an exact answer because nobody knows, and I'm going to go wherever the research takes me. So for my first kind of year. It will be head fixed, anesthetized under wake recordings from thalamus, hippocampus, visual cortex. Just can I confirm that the infra-slow oscillation is there in direct DC voltage? And then I'll be looking at kind of moving to more chronic freely moving animals and looking at the functional relevance based on behavioral tasks and so on, while at the same time assessing the biocompatibility of the probes. So I don't know is the answer. I just want to figure out what these slow waves are doing.
Yeah, could you sort of like reiterate again what these infra-slow oscillations are to the average person?
Yeah, so you've got your standard kind of EEG waveforms, alpha, beta, delta, theta, gamma, which range from 1 to hundreds of hertz. When you are considering firing rates or rhythms, you would put it into one of these bands, but no one really looked lower than 1 hertz because the technology, AC-coupled ethers, hides it inherently. So when you're thinking about these slow fluctuations, what you're really thinking about is network, not single neurons anymore, because single neurons firing at below 0.1 hertz kind of don't carry that much information. You're more so thinking about the local field potential. So the summative, the aggregate electrical potential of a population of neurons over time. And if this population of neurons becomes more excitable as a whole, and the membrane potential is raised slightly as a whole, they're more likely to fire. So the infra-slow oscillation is kind of like an orchestrating rhythm for populations of networks that tell them whether they should be more or less likely to fire at a given time. And then you've got loads of research from like fMRI studies that suggest that it's related to task performance and cognitive performance. So at particular phases of ISO, you're more likely to get a task correct versus wrong. So that's kind of the idea of the ISO, these population level fluctuations in firing potential.
Yeah, how well do we understand these oscillations in animals?
So all of the research that has been done has been inferred. So for example, there was a paper this year, Espinosa 2026, I think it's in review still. But this is kind of like the way it goes. You can look at how faster envelopes like theta or gamma oscillations, how they manifest over time and how they interact with each other. And you can find interactions at these really slow timescales. Excuse me. Or you could take resting state networks and look at how they fluctuate over time. And you can infer that there is an infra-slow potential acting upon your faster envelopes, but you can never see it directly with AC-coupled electrophysiology. Or you can do like functional ultrasound, bold imaging, and you can see these fluctuations at 0.02 hertz roughly. But no one can actually directly see them because they don't have DC-coupled electrophysiology. The only way that you can do it with kind of approaches that already existed prior to the technology that I use is glass micropipettes. But you can only really do that on slice electrophysiology. So you take a brain, you slice it up immediately after it's been removed, you kind of support it metabolically in media, and then you can put this tiny little glass pipette on it with a silver wire in it and record DC current that way. But you can never do that in a fully intact brain until this technology. So yeah, really excited to see kind of how the direct recording of these DC potentials compares to what people have inferred about these firing rates.
Yeah, and so these new transistors that you said they were developed in Barcelona?
Yes.
So graphene-based field effect transistors.
Yes.
So it's a lot of keywords there. Graphene is obviously interesting because it was invented about 5 minutes away from here.
Yeah.
So what's the magic of graphene? Why is it useful here?
I don't know, to be honest. I actually don't know. I should know that, but I don't. I imagine it's the transconductance properties of graphene. It's to do with its ability to stay stable over time. I don't know, to be honest. I'm not a material scientist. I should probably know the answer to that, but I don't.
So good,
I just know that it's what we use and it unlocks DC coupled ethers for us.
Yeah. When you're trying to create these sort of pieces of technology, how monumental is the engineering challenge of it?
That would be a question for Barcelona, not me.
Right.
I would suggest probably pretty big.
Yep.
But again, so outside of my field of expertise, I don't know how much work goes into something like that.
Yeah. So for like transistors and probes and other technologies where we're stabbing the brain, what are you is there anything that really particularly excites you when you look at things like Neuralink and otherwise?
Only the particular technologies that excite me. So much of it is proprietary and internal to the company that you don't really know what they're doing. Like the technical papers that Neuralink released are so vague that you can't really.
Purpose?
Pardon?
Is that on purpose, they're vague?
Oh, of course it is, obviously, because there's so many commercial interests involved that you can't just go, this is exactly what we're doing and it's great, because then everyone's going to copy you. So like there's a necessity behind the opacity to their publications, which is completely understandable and fair enough, but it's also annoying as someone that's interested in it because you don't know really what they're doing. I know that they have like gold micro threads that they use, but I can't really comment on how exciting the technology is because I don't really understand it, because there's not a nice way to really look at thorough examination of it that's been peer reviewed and so on, because it just doesn't exist in the commercial world. So I think generally the field excites me, but there's no way of knowing what goes on behind closed doors, realistically. We're still far away from commercial BCIs, decades, for sure. But yeah, hopefully we'll see them within our lifetime.
Yeah. How do you deal with the kind of ethical questions that arise from this kind of technology? I mean, you're being quite, obviously there's a lot of data involved. You're not reading minds in some way, but you are certainly gathering probably maybe the most personal data of someone, which is what's going on in their brain.
Yeah, this is where the conversation gets much less fun, I suppose.
Yeah.
Because the implications of what could happen with kind of large-scale BCIs, everyone has a chip in their brain, is so scary. So scary for what could happen. But I think I kind of think about it the same way that I think about smartphones, which is that you could say to someone 50 years ago, I will give you a device that allows you to reach anybody in the world instantaneously, to obtain any piece of information that you want instantaneously. You can know where you are, you can capture memories on it. This kind of impossible to imagine device with all of these benefits, and it sounds great, but all the three-letter agencies in the world can listen to all of your private conversations, and conglomerate corporations will also record everything you ever say and every thought you have and dictate, trying to understand your cognitive patterns based on scrolling behaviors and then target you with adverts based on those cognitive patterns. And you're like, whoa, that's a big trade-off. There's a lot of really cool stuff that can happen with it, but it inherently comes with all this bad stuff that happens at the same time. You're never going to have one without the other. When you have a piece of technology that is that transformative, there's going to be used for good and bad in all cases. So the question I ask myself is, do I believe that we should get rid of smartphones because of the cognitive profiling that happens on social media and the blatant spying that happens? No, I don't think so. I think that they make our lives better overall for most people. So it's a technology that we should pursue. The same is what I think about BCIs. Don't get me wrong, it's a different kettle of fish. It's a bigger problem and it's more invasive and there's way more that could go wrong. Yeah. But it's the same kind of thought process that I have, which is I think that it will be genuinely transformative. I think it will be the defining technology of the 21st century, along with AI.
Okay. It's a big statement.
For sure. I'm very confident in that. But of course, there's going to be some crazy stuff that comes with it.
I think for a lot of engineers and scientists, there's a lot of excitement with BCIs. One is just, it's a very cool piece of technology, but also thinking of things, if there's someone with paralysis or blindness or deafness or cognitive impairment, and, there's a surgery that can implant a piece of technology that can completely radically transform their life or give them a life. And I know that there have been patients with Neuralink, for example, that are able to use computers now. Yeah. For that person, there's obviously going to be a lot of skepticism with implanting a thing into the brain. I mean, our brains have spent hundreds of thousands of years evolving, and we're going in and tampering with it. Yeah. However, there is the other side, which is that it can give them this amazing sort of benefit and give them chances at life that they wouldn't have had.
Sure.
And I wonder if it's sort of like a chicken and egg question. Are the ethical questions going to be after the fact or before the fact? I sort of optimistically believe that as we get better with technology, we're going to be more motivated to have better political systems and maybe have, develop our ethical framework to keep up with it. But I feel like there's probably naivety in that. But
the ethical framework will come into question more when we're looking at a transition from patient to person.
Okay.
So my perspective on that is there is no ethical question in my, well, I mean, of course there always is, but there's less of an ethical problem with BCIs for restoring vision in someone that's blind. Easy.
Yes.
The pros and cons is just immensely one-sided. They can see again.
Sure, every patient that's got blindness will say, look, I don't care if MI6 want to hack my brain.
Yeah,
I want to be able to see again.
Exactly.
I want to live a life.
But then when we come to like augmentation for a healthy, normal person, that's when it gets a bit more scary, because then it's like, well, why do you need this technology? Is it going to enhance your life? Probably.
Or do you just want to be a cyborg?
Yeah, exactly. So that I don't think anyone's really going to have ethical issues with helping patients.
Yeah.
No one should. But when it gets to your average Joe wanting a Neuralink, so you can have like binocular vision, not binocular, sorry, telescopic vision. That's when it's like you really have to weigh the pros and cons with the ethics there. But yeah, we can never know what the politics of the future can hold.
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing that AI has shown is that it for some people, it seems that our technology is advancing faster than our ability to regulate it ethically. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know where the root of that problem is. I think, it might just be that as Westerners, a lot of us maybe don't think about ethical questions that much. We're not philosophically trained. We don't really learn about ethics. It's sort of just, we have implied laws, but, no one's...
I don't think it'll be the same with BCIs versus AI. The reason that there's not much legislation, there's a two-sided front to this. It's that one, you don't want to overregulate it if you're in essentially an AI arms race between China and the US. Fine. But then the second thing is that the legal framework isn't there. The legal tools to regulate software of that magnitude, they don't exist. So if you're trying to regulate them with what laws, it's not that straightforward. But when it comes to BCIs, we're talking about medical devices.
Yes.
And the legislative infrastructure for medical devices is massive. So I don't think that we're going to run into kind of one of these problems where it's like self-evolving so quickly and we can't regulate it fast enough. I think that the regulatory framework already exists and is robust enough to effectively do its job and regulate stuff like this.
Yeah, well, I think people are usually going to be in agreement on using it as a piece of pharmacological technology, as a form of medical care, because that kind of regulation there's a lot of scrutiny behind it, and when things go wrong, it's a big deal. I suppose I do wonder if people are going to want that technology, because it's very difficult to try and maybe convince people otherwise. But it's so individual based. Like there will be a camp of people for sure that will just steadfast oppose any form of BCI. Yeah, fair
enough. And then there'll be a camp of people that absolutely love it and are the champions for it, and then there'll be people in between. The degree to which people divide into those tribes will depend on what the technology will actually give the average person in the future. Yeah. Can't say for sure, don't know. Robotic limbs, like cyberpunk kind of stuff, maybe. Maybe like direct vision interfaces, so you can have monitors just floating in your field of vision. Like, there's so much that could happen, but I really don't know. I can't speak to what the future will actually hold, because there's so many possibilities with this kind of technology.
I think for a lot of people as well, it's not necessarily the technology that's a concern, it's the people behind it.
Yeah, sure.
Right. It's the commercial interests.
Sure.
A lot of people have, for many reasons, ethical objections to things like to people like Elon Musk, for example, and of governments, and maybe rightly so, right? There's good cause for that. And so I do wonder who should be at the table making the decisions.
That's actually interesting. That's
Yeah.
exactly why I got into brain-computer interfacing. So when I was 16, it was a very pivotal moment in my life, I suppose. I've not really reflected on this, but I remember being introduced to the concept of BCIs by my dad. And he said, and we were having a discussion, I think I was maybe, how old would I have been? 14, I think. And he said, would you want a chip in your brain? And I went, no chance, absolutely not. Keep that away from my head.
Yeah.
And then we had a discussion about why. And it was because, again, it's the most personal piece of data that you can collect from me is what's going on inside my head, what my thoughts and feelings are.
Yeah.
And the reason I wouldn't want a brain probe is because I wouldn't want someone that I don't know or trust to put a probe in my head. And then we had a discussion. It was like, what if you built the probe and you could have all these benefits, but you done it yourself? There's no external people. Would you then have a brain probe? And I was like, yeah, probably. And then I thought about it and was like, well, this tech's going to be super cool. I don't trust anyone to put a probe in my head, but I trust myself to put a probe in my head. So I will work to get into this field such that I can have faith in the technology that's coming, essentially. I want to be the person. I mean, no bias, I think I'm super ethical, of course, as everyone does, unless you're a psychopath. But I genuinely believe that I will try and do what's good. So when I enter this field, when I am in the BCI space, I won't succumb or allow other people to do unethical things in that space, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think when you look at technology like this, there's a temptation to think of dystopian futures.
100%.
I mean, I think people that have read dystopian, if you've read 1984, the idea of a brain-computer interface, like, no, not going near it.
Yeah.
I'd rather. There probably are people that would probably rather be blind than put it.
Oh yeah,
put a chip in their head. I suppose only time will tell, but I'm generally optimistic.
Yeah, same. It will inevitably, in some way or another, be used for bad. It will be, for sure. Like, you have the advent of modern computing, but then every CPU probably has a backdoor in it that's made at the Intel factory for the CIA, sure. Will that be the case with BCIs? Maybe, hopefully not, but you said, time will tell.
And of course, there's the environmental and sustainability problems as well, which...
I don't really see how the environmental sustainability problem plays into BCIs.
Yeah, well, I think technology generally for a lot of people, it's things like e-waste and
fair enough.
Things like energy usage.
Well, you probably reduce your e-waste because you won't have to replace a phone every 4 years. Because once you have an interface with your brain, that's not something you're going to take in and out every 5 years. That's something that you're going to leave there for 10 years. And the things that will improve is its ability to process the data that it collects. Yeah. So it's these external softwares that will evolve more so than the technology.
Well, I think to finish off, I think a lot of the problem might be there isn't really particularly with academia, there's not really a lot of good communication with the public. I think a lot of people just aren't really aware of what's going on in the world of science. They sort of, it's only when the big tech companies do that final 10% and release some crazy technology. Yeah. Like people weren't thinking about machine learning or AI 10 years ago. No. And then just one day they wake up and there's this new chatbot and they're like, whoa, this is everything. Yeah. There was years of stuff before that that led up to it. So I think probably what I'm trying to do is improve that problem, hopefully. Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything you want to add before we finish off?
No. It's been lovely speaking to you. Thank you for having me on.
Easy. Thank you very much.